Hello everyone, my name is Boulevard. This is not the tier list, this is last week's tier list, but I needed to talk first about the amount of bullshit that y'all put me through sometimes, man. Okay, so this is the tier list that we came up with last week. There are some things that I instantly need to change. Samira Varus didn't fucking show up this week. That goes down. I think Pantheon probably goes up. And the reason that I think Pantheon, like, Varus went down is because I talked last week about how I thought, like, only top players were playing it. And then, like, as the meta progressed over the course of the week, because this, like, last weekend was 2 weeks after patch day, so that's when Samira Varus was still doing good. Now I think that the meta has evolved so much that, like, there's just not a lot of reason to play Samira Varus. You should just play Fizz and skill get people. I think these move up. These still stay here. Nasus goes off the tier list. Frostbite mid-range goes down a tier. Talia Malphite goes down a tier. Deep probably even goes down a tier because I finally figured out what's happening out with the mid-range dogfight. What's happening is these decks are performing extremely well in Brazil tournaments and LATAM tournaments. But when you look at big open tournaments, they're not having that success. In fact, Brazil just hasn't been having a lot of success lately in general. And ultimately, I'm waiting for them to finally get their win in a Runeterra Open or like even come close to it. It's been not kind to them lately. Pantheon probably goes up a tier, though I'm not super happy about it. Yada, yada, yada. All this stuff to say that, you know, there were some adjustments to be made. Sure, that's fine. I get that. And then I'll like look at these and I'll, you know, put out the stats and whatnot. But the problem is that I was already, you know, the meta looked settled and I was good. I was chilling. I was like, okay, I'll get up here. I'll look at the charts. I'll figure it out, you know. And then in the finals of the Master Runeterra Open that we had last weekend, there's a Kai'Sa mirror in the finals. And it's not like a mirror match. It's like Garen Jarvan Kai'Sa versus champion strength Akshan Kai'Sa. And it's like, great. Now Kai'Sa's in the mix in a big way. And I have to figure out which version is better. Every deck has two versions right now. There's two versions of every fucking deck in the meta right now. And then, on top of all of that, I wake up and Nasus is the most played deck in the game right now. Out of nowhere. Because people submit their decks for tournaments on Saturday. And then Nasus didn't pop up until like Sunday night, Monday morning or some shit like that. And now there's absolutely no data on it. So the best assessment of Nasus that I can give you is like just what the charts say, which we know is not a great assessment. But I have no other information to go off of. And I need to get this out for you earlier in the week. So that you have time to utilize the information. So just understand that I'm going to snap my fingers and through the power of movie magic in 3 hours of real time, I'm going to have an actual tier list in front of me with some charts and stats on it. And then understand that everything I say about Nasus probably doesn't... How did Nasus come out of nowhere, dude? What the f***? As you can see, it's darker outside, and I figured some things out. Now, normally I like to put the stats up here, but because there's so many different versions of each deck, and it's impossible for me, at least using the tools that I have available, to parse which version swings a matchup which way. Like, I'm not going to be able to find stats on, like, the Shelly Burblefish version of Fizz Samira versus decks, and then the Powder Pandemonium version versus other decks. Like, that's just not something that I currently have the capabilities of doing, and if I learned, it would probably take all night, and then I wouldn't be able to actually shoot this video. So, I'm just going to forgo the stats, especially because, like, I've kind of just lumped all of the non-Fizz Samira decks together, because they all seem to be doing reasonably well. For example, here is the top 8 breakdown from the Mastering Runeterra Open that took place, mind you, like, I'm shooting this Tuesday night, so this happened like 3 days ago. Samira Fizz, Bilgewater, Bandlegunners, and Shen Jarvan all tied for the top spot, which, like, Shen Jarvan didn't expect that to be up there. And then Demacia Bandlegunners ties with Frostbite mid-range. Then we have absolutely no idea which Samira deck, like, secondary Samira variant is better, because all of them put one person in the top cut. Aatrox Vayne is like completely absent from the list, which I thought was a little weird. There's only one Heimer Jace, which seems right. The Alawi deck isn't Alawi Jarvan. In fact, it's Alawi Nora. Lurk got in there. There's a couple different Kai'Sa lists. There's like an Annie Jhin that snuck in there. And then, like, you go and you look at ladder, and it's just, like, a complete mess, right? Like, suddenly Karma Set is back with a vengeance. Jinx Samira has risen to the top 5. Deep is a top 5 deck with a negative win rate. It's absolutely madness, and, like, Bandlegunners has fallen down from, like, you know, a week ago it had, like, 10,000 plays, now it has, like, 5,000. Lurk is back up there on ladder. Like, there's such a big dichotomy, but I think I kind of like finally figured everything out, and the gist is that I'm going to try not to overthink things, and I have like a couple of notes about a couple of decks, but as you can see, not only is this tier list like 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 10, it's like 15 decks, and then there's like 2 different versions of most of these decks, so I have a couple of like important notes about certain things, but I think I kind of figured out how to navigate this one. So Samira Fizz and Bandlegunners. Those are your big two. Those are your big two. That's what everybody's looking at. Fizz Samira is losing to Karma Set, Jinx decks, Aatrox, and Shen Jarvan. That's what the stats were saying. Bandle Gunners, the Demacia version is losing to Shen Jarvan, Samira Fizz, and Pantheon Samira. And then Bilgewater Tristana has apparently actually flipped the matchup and is now beating the Demacia version of Bandle Gunners, which I think is a little bit weird. But it is also losing to Nasus, Aatrox, Pantheon, Varus, and it's actually getting damn near to 50% on Samira Fizz, which previously was supposed to be a bad matchup for it. So, like, Bilgewater Bandle Gunners is, like, really starting to swing outside of its weight class given its previous week performance, and maybe that is just part of it being the builds getting cleaned up a little bit, people realizing, like, oh, you know, like, we don't need Buster Shot in here, we're going to play the one of Puzzling Signpost, and, like, the one of, Eye of Nagakoboros that has become very popular, kind of, I don't know, I guess, like, streamlined the builds a little bit more, got more familiar with playing them, and now the matchup charts for Bilgewater Bandle Gunners is actually looking really good. Samira Fizz, like, it's wild to me that this is starting to lose to Karma Set. It's also a little weird to me that, like, it's losing to Shen J4, but so is Bandle Gunners Demacia, which brings me to an important point. I think that you're going to run into a lot of Samira Fizz Bandle Gunner lineups, right? Like, those seem like very good decks. The weird part is that both of these decks are targetable, but there's not enough of an overlap on what is targeting them for you to have to worry about splitting these up, I think. Because if Nasus comes in, like, the only deck that is actually beating both Samira Fizz and Bandle Gunner Bilgewater consistently is nothing. If I'm reading this right. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that is beating both of these. If you want to bring Samira Fizz and the Demacia version of Bandle Gunner, then you have an overlapping loss condition of Shen Jarvan. And I think Shen Jarvan's going to be really popular because, like Alawi Jarvan, it's just kind of a hard to fuck up deck, you know? It's really going to get people through the early rounds like Shen Fiora did in the past. It's just like a solid deck, and that's kind of what Shen Jarvan is doing. It's like more polarizing than I expected it to be overall, but its bad matchups are kind of unpopular decks. Like, Deep is a bad matchup for it, but you're really not seeing a lot of Deep right now, and Deep is doing, like, so poorly into the rest of the field that, like, you can probably just get away with it. You're also losing to Heimer Jace and Echo Jinx. Again, you're bad into Bilgewater Bandle Gunners, but you're getting Demacia Bandle Gunners, so, like, if you are running Jarvan, you might have to adjust your ban strategy depending on which version of Bandle Gunners you run into, unless you're confident in the matchup. But the one thing I did want to point out is, like, yeah, you have a bad Heimer Jace matchup, but Heimer Jace historically never gets played as much as it should. So you should be fine with that. But back to the main point here, I think that, like, it's very reasonable to just go, like, Samira Fizz, Bandle Gunner X, and then we're sort of just back to our classic formula for Legends of Runeterra of, like, I have my two decks, and then finding that third deck is a pain in the ass. Nasus, the surprise new deck of the week, is getting absolutely ass blasted by Karma Set and Fizz Samira. I am talking like a 25% win rate versus Fizz Samira and like a 35% win rate versus Karma Set. And if Karma Set is beating Nasus and Fizz Samira, then that is something that you might want to be looking at bringing back into your lineup. Just because, like, those are going to be two of the most popular decks, like Nasus obviously taking over. Now, granted, this video has to come out Wednesday, so it's possible that things change between Wednesday and Saturday, and keep in mind this is getting shot on Tuesday, so just be on the lookout for that, right? But the point is, like, I think Nasus is a little bit more questionable than you might expect it to be. Like, it's, so it's obviously, like, it's losing to Fizz Samira, it's losing to Karma Set. It's slightly losing into Tristana, but other than that, it is looking pretty good. It's definitely a worrisome choice, and if you do run into, like, Tristana and Samira Fizz lineups, then you kind of just take aim at the third deck, and, like, it's probably okay. And that's where that, you know, as always in Legends of Runeterra, that third deck is going to be the absolute breaking point for people. You just have to put a little bit more thought into your lineup, I think. I don't think you can just, like, jam Nasus into every lineup, but I definitely think it has a place in the meta. Again, it's like, it's losing to some of the best decks in the game, but it's doing so well into the general field that I think Samira Fizz Bandle Gunner is like your expected lineup, right? Like you go Samira Fizz, you go Bandle Gunners. I don't think it I don't like Bilgewater is gonna be more popular, but I don't think it matters. And then X, and then I think like Nasus, Shen Jarvan, X is gonna be a relatively popular lineup, not as powerful, but I think this is like a really solid lineup to get you through the open rounds. And that's kind of like, this is very powerful, this is very solid. And then it really does depend on what your X deck is, though, because again, Nasus is losing into these two. Shen Jarvan is, you know, kind of dumpstering these two. but you really need to then find your third deck that is doing well here. And it's probably just going to be one of these. Like if you go Nasus plus Jarvan, you're probably just running one of these as the third decks, and like that's fine. Whereas if these are your two decks, I don't know that you can necessarily like just go grab Shen Jarvan or Nasus as your third deck. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. Because we're going to move on to tier 2. So again, one of the important things I want to point out about this here top 8 open that just happened is that there's no Aatrox Vayne. Despite that, I still think the deck is quite good, and it is doing pretty well into, like, Samira Fizz, and yeah, it's doing very well into Samira Fizz, and then, you know, it's kind of getting outpaced by some of the slower things, but it is beating Bilgewater Tristana. I don't think I actually mentioned Bilgewater Tristana's matchups, which is, like, it's losing to Nasus, Aatrox, Pantheon. Okay, no, I did mention that. But basically, like, Aatrox Vayne is still good into the top 2. And so maybe that's the lineup. Maybe, like, Nasus, Jarvan, Aatrox Vayne is, like, a pretty safe lineup to get you through the Swiss rounds if you are worried that these decks are going to get targeted. And I don't think that's an unreasonable assumption. The good news is you're not going to find a lot of lineups that have an overlapping target onto these. So it's not like, oh, crap, dude, like there's a lineup that's just beating me because I brought both these decks. The problem is there are going to be lineups that are beating this deck and then lineups that are beating this deck. And because of the ban phase, like I do think it is a little risky to run these together if you're not totally confident in your ability to pilot these. And then from there, like there's really not much of a point that I want to make about the rest of the meta. Like I said, I really don't want you to overthink it this week. And I'm worried that if I try to get into like the nitty gritty of like, yeah, here's why you want to be running these control decks, or like why these decks come in. I think you're just going to end up getting confused and overthinking. One thing I do want to touch on though is like Garen Kai'Sa, because obviously By Attack won the MR Open with this, and to me it kind of came out of nowhere. And then Akshan Champion Strength Kai'Sa got second place. I don't think that's anything. The stats on that are basically non-existent, but there were a lot of stats on Kai'Sa Garen. You don't have to run J4. You know, you could run like Jarvan, Shen, and then like just run Kai'Sa Garen. It's just a one of J4. You don't have to worry about it. Don't think too hard about it. So Garen Kai'Sa is absolutely rolling over Bandle Gunners. It's not looking good into Echo Jinx, most Samira decks, and it's kind of iffy into Nasus. But outside of that, you're looking good. So to break it down, to reevaluate, again, play comfort as always, but like Samira Fizz Bandle Gunner X, that is, I think, like statistically the best lineup, but this is targetable, and this is targetable. They're not really targetable by the same things, but again, if you do run into a lineup targeting one, then you will just end up losing. Aatrox, Shen Jarvan, and Nasus will probably get you through the open rounds, right? Aatrox is winning into Fizz Samira. Shen Jarvan is winning into like Bandle Gunners, and then Nasus is like doing okay into Bandle Gunners. So, you know, this doesn't do great into this, but there's a good chance that people get scared off of this, and then this is doing like really well into sort of the rest of the field. That's the big takeaway here, right? Rewind that and rehear me on that if you need to. But again, I think that like you can split these up and be fine. It is a little risky to run them together, especially because I think a lot of things are going to be trying to target these. But I think like this is a very solid lineup, and then you could even change one of these out for Kai'Sa, because again, Kai'Sa's like just destroying Bandle Gunners. So if you're looking to like pick on Gunners, right, then your lineup is probably I'm like looking at my sticky note that has all my things on it. You would be Shen J4. You would be Kai'Sa. And then there's not like a super consistent third deck that is like rolling over Gunners. You might end up on like, it's probably just a Samira deck actually. If you're looking to beat Bandle Gunners, then it's probably like Shen Jarvan, Kai'Sa, and then like a Samira deck. And this is for Bilgewater Gunners. Demacia Gunners actually has like pretty different matchups. But according to the stats, this is what's doing it. And if you want the most potent one to beat it, then it is actually Pantheon. So there's your beat Bandle Gunners lineup, right? If you want to beat Samira Fizz, then your lineup is like, it gets a little bit dicier because it's like Aatrox, Shen, J4, and then like your Karma Set is your best third option, but this is really kind of polarizing into the meta. It's doing well versus Nasus though, so like I think this kind of matchup can also do pretty well in the Nasus. One thing I actually, hold up, one thing I do want to look up in real time, because this is not something I thought of, but it's probably rather important, is how is Shen Jarvan doing into Nasus? You know what I mean? Because if you are just running this mid-range lineup and other people are running this mid-range lineup, you know, what is the ban in a situation like that? Verdict is in. Nasus versus Shen Jarvan is a pretty close matchup. It's like slightly Nasus favored. Okay, so that's good. It's not like absolutely blowing one way out of the water or vice versa. So those are kind of like my lineup recommendations and just the kind of things that I want you thinking about. But ultimately, there's just so many decks. There's so many decks, and those are kind of the baseline thoughts that I have. And outside of that, like I said, I'm going to try to keep this one like super simple, so I don't like over talk you into overthinking. If you saw me like molding on Twitter, like just look at this. I have never had so many different versions of decks, and if you're wondering like why I have even a like. Yeah, maybe it looks like I was forcing two versions of Ashe LeBlanc, but these are the two versions that topped in the Mastering Runeterra Open. We had like the standard Ashe LeBlanc, and then we had like this Kato the Arm Reckless Trifarian version. Turrets versus no turrets for Heimer Jace. Turrets has been performing better in tournaments. Sorry won the Saturday Scramble 2 weeks ago, and then we had one Heimer Jace in top cut of the MR Open. That was again a turret variant, but I know a lot of the like MR players are looking more at no turrets, so you know, kind of take that one as you will. Nora Nar, Nora Vygar, these are still like doing okay. They're not like the best decks in the world, but they're not the worst decks in the world. They certainly have their places in the lineups, but like I think if I try to dig into like where you want to be fitting Nora control into a lineup, that's where I'm going too deep and I'm going to start like losing people. And then Echo Jinx is actually a very like volatile choice into the meta. Like I think I mentioned, it's beating Fizz Samira. It's beating, I think it's beating Nasus. Trying to remember. I only wrote like some of this stuff down. I just kind of like took cliff notes. It's beating Kai'Sa and it's beating Shen Jarvan. So Echo Jinx definitely will pose a problem for like the Kai'Sa Jarvan Aatrox or like Kai'Sa Jarvan Nasus lineups. So that's just something like Kai'Sa actually looks Echo Jinx like looks pretty good into certain matchups and definitely ones that you expect to see over the course of the weekend. I'm not sure how it does in an S. I don't actually remember. I didn't write it down, so I was probably like not super swingy one way or the other. And then, like, I'm actually just going to completely ignore Tier 3. Keep in mind that, like, Karma Set exists. It's doing very well on ladder, but in tournaments, it has not been doing anything pretty much since the patch dropped. And I don't expect a massive swing on that going into the WCQ just because it's doing well on ladder. I also put the Targon version here because people have started running the Targon version, and, like, it's just something I want you to be aware of. But Piltover and Zon is definitely my preferred version as well as the more popular version. So I'm just going to repeat myself if I say anything else. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this helped. A link to the description, a link to the tier list is in the description below. It's in my link tree. It always has been. Thank you so much for watching. I have been Boulevard. As always, good luck in your tournaments.